Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, TV, literature, and pop culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria. Tracy, what's new with you?
Oh, just trying to get into the holiday spirit, Bruce. I'm finding there are so many people that are already kind of like full barrel in with the holiday season. My neighbors decorated yesterday. They have all of their Christmas inflatables and lights going, and there's Christmas music coming from the outside, and it's inspiring. I'll have to get my butt into gear and maybe decorate next weekend. It feels early, but it's really not that early. How's everything been going with you?
Okay, it's kind of in between time of year. It's that post-Halloween dip that I think I always go through. And the
Hmm.
Christmas season, while a lot of people are acting like it's here, it doesn't quite completely feel that way. We haven't had any snow yet here in upstate New York, although that could happen
Hmm.
any day. So we're sort of in between holidays. We're in that just sort of limbo between Halloween and Christmas. Of course, Thanksgiving is just around the corner. It's always a weird time. November is difficult month for me because the baseball season's come to an end.
Right.
Halloween is over. Plus, I can't stand these dark days. I mean, it gets
Mm,
dark at like 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon. I absolutely hate that. I mean, I'm sure you experience the same thing where you are. I
yes.
just do
Yeah.
not, I do not like this changing the clock and giving us more darkness in the day. I just can't stand it. I really can't.
Oh gosh, no, me neither. And I was out grocery shopping yesterday, and I came out from the store and it was so dark, and I looked at my watch and it was only 20 after 4 in the afternoon. And I don't like this time of year either. My calendar, if you could see it right now, I X out the days on my calendar
Mhm.
until spring comes back, because this is just, I dread this time of year. I mean, I love the Halloween season. I love the Christmas season, but I just don't like the stuff that goes with it.
Yeah. Yeah, you look up, it's 4:40 in the afternoon, and then you think, man, it feels like 7:30, 8 o'clock. It's dark. And you just realize you're 3 hours off track. That's just crazy. It really
That's
is.
right. That's right.
Well, we're going to start jumping ahead toward Christmas right here on this show, on our Ghostly Gallery podcast. We're planning on a more extensive Christmas horror film review, something that we've got working. We'll hopefully have that sometime in December. But right now, we're going to do a little bit of a sneak peek ahead toward the Christmas season. We're going to be talking about two films that have been set at Christmas time. One of those films came out 50 years ago. The other came out just 5 years ago. So from 1974, we have the cult classic Black Christmas. And then from 2019, a film that is not as well known, but one that you really like. It is called The Lodge. So we'll be talking about both of those movies during our program today. So, Tracy, let's begin with Black Christmas, 1974 film directed by Bob Clark, filmed up in your country, filmed in Canada. It's a movie that tells the story of an unseen killer stalking and murdering members of a local sorority house. Now, the story is set on a college campus just before the Christmas break. So, several college students getting ready to head out. Some will stay back in the sorority. But the college students who really receive most of the airtime in the film are played by Olivia Hussey and Margot Kidder. They're living in this sorority house, and they're plagued by strange phone calls from a man who breathes very heavily and speaks incoherently, much as I do on this program week after week. Now, at first, the phone calls by themselves are not all that concerning, but the concern heightens when another resident of the sorority, Claire Harrison, goes missing. And her disappearance prompts a call to the police. And at first, the local police express a little worry. They believe Claire has simply left campus without telling anybody. They don't seem too worried at all. But their attitude then changes when the parent of a local 13-year-old girl also goes to the police telling them that her daughter has been missing for several hours. And I guess, you have a 13-year-old versus someone who's, probably 19 or 20. Well, that's a different dynamic. So the police are more concerned. They take this complaint a bit more seriously. They conduct a nighttime search of a local park, and that's where the young girl's body turns up. It's obvious that she has been murdered. Now the police are ready to look more intently at the report of the older Claire having gone missing as well. Well, soon after all this develops, the sorority's den mother, I guess that's the proper term,
Yes.
adult woman who oversees the sorority house, at least back in the early 70s, not sure if they have them today. So this den mother is seen climbing the stairs of the house into the attic. She is in search of her cat. Instead, when she gets up there and she looks up from the ladder, she notices the body of a victim wrapped in cellophane, and it is indeed Claire, the one who had gone missing. And then at that moment, the killer, whom we don't see, throws a hook into the den mother, pulls her up further into the attic, murdering her in the process. Now, this unseen killer will commit several more murders until he is seemingly killed off in self-defense by one of the sorority members. But then comes a major twist at the end of the movie. It's a very disturbing twist at that, and it kind of leaves you with a much different tenor to the film at that point. So that is the basic gist of 1974's Black Christmas. Tracy, let's get some of your initial thoughts on this film.
So I honestly thought I had already seen this movie before, but I put it on and watched it the other night, and then I realized I didn't see it. So I'm starting to watch it, and of course, I'll date myself here. I'm a Gen Xer, of course. I grew up in the 80s. So this movie gave me, this is so weird, Bruce, but the vibes of the Facts of Life TV show, but maybe the after hours version. So I had that kind of stuck in the back of my head as I was watching this. It's like, what if the Facts of Life girls kind of went bad and this was kind of, another take on it. I thought the subject matter was kind of cool. The old school telephone pranks. I don't even know if people do that anymore. The prank phone calls that turn from annoying to creepy to downright terrifying. I thought it was a good storyline. I didn't find throughout the entire film, gore or violence. There is some comedy throughout the movie with Margot Kidder. That she provided some good comedic relief throughout the film. And, it tackled various subject matters too that were really quite relevant at the time, especially being the early 70s. The atmosphere was kind of dark and creepy, I guess you could say. And just the whole setting of the sorority house, just kind of was a spooky feeling. That house was really weird. It threw off weird vibes. Slow burn kind of a deal, but man, I was on edge throughout that entire film. So that's kind of my initial type of feeling.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to this Facts of Life thing. Did you think Mrs. Garrett was going to come out of the walls with a big knife?
I did. Oh my gosh, the den mother reminded me so much of Mrs. Garrett.
Yeah.
Maybe the nighttime version of Mrs. Garrett. So again, I had that going through my mind. It's oh my gosh, this is exactly what it feels like to me.
Yeah. I used to watch that show. I'm not sure why.
It was a great show. It
I
was
don't
a
think it was
great
necessarily
show.
that great, but I watched that on NBC. I can't remember which night. Yeah, I like Nancy McKeon. She played one of the regular characters. And
Yes.
then Lisa Whelchel, who played Blair, she has a TV show, I think, on AMC now about like collectibles and pop culture.
Oh, really? I didn't know
So she's
that.
still active. Yeah. Yeah, I forget the name of the show, but we don't get AMC anymore. When we did, I remember it was on like Sunday nights. And
Hmm.
I think it was about like rare collectible items or pop culture items, something like that. So yeah, I do remember that show. I guess the house that they were in the movie Black Christmas was a little bit
Hmm.
similar to the Facts of Life house,
Yeah.
but certainly none of the characters. There was certainly no Margot Kidder type character in Facts of Life. We know
No.
that for sure.
That's right.
Spouting profanities and drinking alcohol at every turn. That was a little bit different.
That's right.
I'm wondering, you said you thought you had seen this before. Is it
Mhm.
possible that you confused this maybe with the 2006 Black Christmas? Is that possible?
That is possible. That is really possible, actually, because I was actually going to go back and try to watch some of the kind of reimagination versions, but
Hmm.
maybe that's possible because the title, I'm so familiar with the title. That's why I thought I had seen it before. But you might be onto something. Maybe I did see like one of the later versions.
Yeah, that one from 2006 has Mary Elizabeth Winstead, among others.
Hmm.
It's actually pretty good. Actually, I'm going to talk about this later. I've seen all three of the Black Christmases. Two of the three generally well received by the public. I happen to like all three, but I'll talk more
Hmm.
about that a bit later on. As far as this Black Christmas, the original from 74, so you've got Margot Kidder, whom we mentioned, and Olivia Hussey. They're in two of the lead roles. They play the two most prominent sorority members. Hussey plays a character named Jess Bradford, seemingly straight laced student, while Kidder takes on this very different role of Barb, a heavy drinker with a foul mouth. I mean, she's capable of saying just about anything. There's that cringe worthy scene where she's talking to Claire's father, and Claire is still missing, and she makes some highly inappropriate remarks about what exactly might have happened to Claire and how she wasn't to blame for it. And I mean, that scene was kind of a disaster for Barb, but it gave you a little bit of insight into her character. She was, pretty much sloshed as well. So
Hmm.
when people drink, they tend to be a little bit more honest than they should be. Now, while her character was obviously, very much off the straight and narrow, the character of Jess, while straight laced, has a bit of a complication because she reveals that she has become pregnant. She wants to get an abortion. She tells her boyfriend Peter that that is her desire. Peter is played by Keir Dullea, and his character, he's dead set against the abortion, no pun intended. He does not want that to happen. He wants to get married. He wants to leave his job. I forget exactly what the job was, but it's a job that he's pretty much sick of. So he's ready to move on to the next stage of his life. He's ready to become a husband and become a father, but Jess does not really share that belief. And because of the tension between the two, that creates suspicion that Peter might indeed be the killer. We really start to wonder about that halfway through the film. Another key role that's played in this movie is by one of my favorites among character actors, and that's the longtime actor John Saxon. He's the guy who was in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. He's done a number of horror movies and action films. He was in Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. Great character actor who passed away just a couple of years ago. And in Black Christmas, he plays the part of a very serious and determined police investigator named Lieutenant Fuller. And this is exactly the kind of role that we remember John Saxon for. It seemed like every other year he was playing police authority figures. very serious, very businesslike. And that's the role that Saxon was, I think, made for. And I think was the role that he was most well known for, playing these police authority types. And he's very good in that role in Black Christmas. Now, at the police unit where he works, incompetence seems to be the rule of thumb. I mean, the desk sergeant is a real moron. We see that in a couple of scenes. But amidst all this incompetence, Lieutenant Fuller stands out as someone who is far more capable and far more thorough. He seems like the right person to conduct an investigation into the killing of the 13-year-old and eventually the discovery of the body of Claire. Tracy, I'm curious to get your perspective, your thought on some of the individual performances, some brand name actors. How did you think they did in this movie?
I thought they did really great. I thought Olivia Hussey, I thought she was amazing. Her character, she was going through personal stuff, again, that was really controversial at the time. So she was dealing with that and her boyfriend's behavior. She was dealing with the craziness of the prank phone calls and the disturbing escalation of just like how creepy everything was getting. She managed to stay under control. And at no point did she become, weak or fall apart. And I think the writers did like a really good job maintaining that character development. Just some writers would just like write that off and, make her fall apart during everything, but they didn't do that here. There were so many well-known actors in this film, Bruce, and a lot of Canadian talent too. Margot Kidder that we mentioned earlier, just so bold, but I always see her as Lois Lane. So it was really hard for me to kind of, see her in this type of role. But my gosh, she was hilarious. And, the one scene at the police station when she was talking to the officer was it was very bold. And, to me, that's not Lois Lane. That's this character. But I mean, there was an actor, his name is Art Hindle, and he played Claire's boyfriend, another Canadian. He was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which I didn't know until earlier today, but grew up in Toronto. And, he, although he didn't have a huge role, he's just so recognizable. And he's got over 200 credits in film and TV. He was in Invasion of the Body Snatchers with Donald Sutherland from 1978, and the star of the long-running Canadian TV series called ENG that aired, I think, the late 80s to the early 90s. So he was really excellent. And Andrea Martin, who I didn't immediately recognize, she played Phyllis. She was so quirky, and she added a sense of comedy but steadiness at the same time. And of course, she's well known for her gig on SCTV, another Canadian comedy series with John Candy, Eugene Levy, Catherine O'Hara, Joe Flaherty. But overall, I really enjoyed the cast. I thought they were all excellent and very famous, actually. So I thought they did a really great job.
You mentioned Art Hindle. What'd you think of that fur coat that he was wearing in the movie?
I thought it was very unusual, but hey, it was like the early 70s. So I think it probably fit for the time.
Actually, kind of reminded me of 1920s colleges and universities where some of the guys would wear elaborate fur coats like that, especially I think if they were in fraternities. That's sort of what I thought of. I didn't know if that was still fashionable in the 70s, but it did look a little odd to see him in the police station parading around in that jacket. It kind of reminded me of the Seinfeld episode when Jerry has the fur coat that he's wearing, right. And takes a little bit of criticism from Newman and some other people for that. I think it was Newman. Jerry looked a bit ridiculous. I thought Art Hindle looked a little bit ridiculous as well.
He did. that was just so bizarre to see. I just I had to keep putting myself back into that era and other movies of that same period. It's just the clothing. You don't really see that kind of stuff today. So it looked rather unusual.
Yeah, for a film that did not have a huge budget, some really good actors, Hussey,
Mhm.
Kidder, John Saxon, Art Hindle, though he was, pretty young at that point and had not really
Mhm.
fully established himself in horror films, but he would certainly do that later on. So they were able to get some really good talent, especially young talent, to play in the film, despite the lack of a budget. So good performances across the board, pretty believable characters. I guess Margot Kidder is a little bit over the top, but certainly you could see a college girl drinking a little bit too much, saying some of the things that Margot said in the film. When we look at Black Christmas as a whole, it's a film that's far more subtle than it is gory. It's also, I think it's very important to point out, it's very innovative in that director Bob Clark shows all of the murders from the perspective of the killer. And this is something that had practically never been done before in horror movies. Maybe it happened once or twice before. I certainly don't remember it specifically, but it was done for all the murders without exception in this movie. So we never see the killer's face, we never see his body. When he's committing his crimes, we only see what he sees, the victim and the surroundings in the room, and that's it. And the only clue we have to his identity is the name of Billy. And he mentions that name a few times during those mostly incoherent phone calls to the sorority house. So we don't know who Billy is. There's no Billy that's otherwise mentioned in the film. So I suspect the killer, which I know this is a little bit of a giveaway. We never know the identity of the killer, but it seems that it must be somebody outside of the cast that we see in the movie itself. Now, Black Christmas is sometimes given credit for another innovation. It's often been referred to as the first slasher film ever made, and that's actually not quite true. Technically, that honor belongs to a movie called Peeping Tom. This was a movie that came out 14 years earlier, 1960. Peeping Tom, very controversial British film about a murderous photographer who tries to take pictures of young women at the moment that they're dying. And this was such a controversial movie that it was actually pulled from British theaters shortly after it was released to the public. That didn't happen in America, but it was pulled by the British theaters, many of them around that country. A little more history on the film Black Christmas. We talked a bit about this earlier, but there have been a total of 3 Black Christmas movies that have been made, starting with this debut in 1974, and then continuing with films in 2006, and then the most recent came out in 2019. I happen to like all 3. They all have a very different feel to them. Even the critically panned adaptation of 2019 with Imogen Poots, people skewered that. I actually saw it in the theater and really enjoyed it. I thought it was terrific, but most other people do not agree with me. But certainly my favorite of the 3 is the one we're talking about tonight. That's the original with Hussey, Kidder, Saxon, and company. A little bit more history, Tracy. Black Christmas produced very mediocre numbers at the box office in 74. And it also received mostly negative reviews from the critics of the day. But as we see with so many horror movies, those critics, they're shown to be off base. It's amazing how many times this happens. This film has become increasingly popular over the last 50 years. And now I think generally regarded by critics and fans as a cult classic of horror. And I think it deserves that reputation.
Mhm.
Fans have come to respect its effectiveness in using mystery, misdirection, subtlety over blood and guts and gore. I think it's a really well done movie, particularly for its time. And even though it has been made over twice since then, this really does remain the standard bearer for the Black Christmas franchise. I like it a lot. I give it 3.5 stars. How about you, Tracy? What are your thoughts and your ranking on it?
You know what? I really did like this movie, and I was really interested in seeing like more of the killer, or at least wanted a glimpse into who they were, what they were doing. Like, who the heck is Billy? Like, who's Agnes? Why did they target this particular group of people? Was it just an easy target? Was there like some weird connection between the killer and the sorority house? I, for one, thought at one point that the killer was Jess's boyfriend. We learned that it wasn't. So I did like the aspect, like you mentioned, that you saw the murders through the killer's eyes. And the only time we ever get any kind of a glimpse is we see the killer's eyeball in a closet door. Like, that is it. You don't see anything else. I don't I might have seen maybe the 2006 version, maybe, but I think I'm gonna have to check all of them out, because from what I understand, one of those versions kind of gives their take on who Billy might be. So I'm kind of interested to see how that comes to fruition, just maybe in a different timeline. So I'm curious about that. I thought the ending was a little bit odd. I didn't really expect the movie to end the way that it ended. But like I said, overall, I really liked it. It's a true psychological horror. There's a few slow spots, but it just added to, I guess, my anxiety and my curiosity factor on how this story was going to end. And I gave this one 3 stars, which is really good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. 3 stars from you.
Yeah.
3.5 stars from me. I did rewatch most of the film last night, and I'm glad that I did that, because the last time I saw it before last night, I think I might have been watching it on Comet or some other channel, and they cut a lot of the scenes out. And I
Oh,
was watching it on
really?
Tubi last night, and I know Tubi has a reputation for cutting some scenes, but they had a lot more material. They had a longer running time and more of the actual film than the previous time when I watched it on Comet TV.
Oh,
So
wow.
I think a more complete idea of the film. I've seen it several times now in
Mhm.
various edited formats, but I think last night really gave me a good idea about the quality of the movie, and it is
Yeah.
good. So you give it 3 stars, I give it 3.5 stars. It is definitely a classic of the holiday season. There's no doubt
Mhm.
about that. All right, Tracy, we go from 1974 to a more recent time, 2019. Next up, we're going to talk about another movie that is set during the Christmas season, although I have to say it doesn't feel like Christmas for much of this movie. This 2019 film is called The Lodge. And you specifically picked this one out for us to review. I chose
Mhm.
Black Christmas. You went with The Lodge. So I'm going to have you tell us the storyline, which is a bit of a tricky proposition because there are a lot of twists and turns. And we have a desire not to spoil the premise of the film for those who have never seen it. So, Tracy, do your best in kind of giving us a sense of what went on in The Lodge.
Oh my goodness. This is very difficult, I will admit. So for our second film, I actually went on a mission to try to find an obscure type of holiday horror movie, but I wanted it to be kind of recent. So I Googled, I searched lists, and I came across this film called The Lodge. This film was released, like you said, in 2019. It premiered at multiple film festivals, and then it actually didn't debut in theaters until 2020. And believe it or not, The Lodge is actually a Hammer horror film in collaboration with Film Nation Entertainment. It was entirely shot in Canada, specifically Quebec. And there's a very, very small cast, just a handful of stars. So there's Riley Keough, Jaeden Martell, Lia McHugh, Richard Armitage, and Alicia Silverstone. And this film was written and directed by Severin Fiala, I believe that's how you say that, and Veronica Franz. So basically, the story follows this young woman named Grace. She's played by Riley. She's about to marry a man who has two young children, Aiden and Mia. The family decides to go to this way out remote lodge to celebrate Christmas. But soon after arriving, the family unexpectedly hears that the father needs to go back to town, which is 5 hours away, on business for a few days. So this leaves Grace and the children home alone. And these aren't like young children, I should add. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 15 and maybe 12. So they're kind of young teenagers. And, you know, they're left alone together. The kids don't know Grace at all. The weather starts to take this bizarre turn. There's a terrible winter storm that's rolling in. It's like a blizzard outside. This kind of further isolates them from the outside world. It's kind of weird because then some bizarre and unsettling events start to happen. The children, they already have a really strong dislike for Grace. I'll put it that way. They're very cautious of her due to her past. We see very early in the movie that the kids have done their homework on their father's new girlfriend, and they kind of get a really good sense of who she is. They discover that their father has actually written a book about Grace and that she was the lone survivor of a mass cult suicide. There's articles and found footage clips that have been shown in the movie. And we, as the audience, we kind of get a good sense of how things might go down for these kids. Unusual things continue to happen. And, you know, throughout the movie, we see Grace and her mental stability start to unravel. And we're just kind of left to wonder, what's going on? Is this supernatural, or maybe there's something else that's happening? So that's kind of like the premise of this movie without really giving anything away.
Well, I may give a couple of things away, but they're relatively early in the movie. So to me, if you do a spoiler for something that's like 10, 15 minutes in the movie, it's not that big a deal. So right from the start, this was a film that really felt dreary to me, particularly when the distraught mother of these two young children, played by Alicia Silverstone. Now, she is separated from her husband, played by Richard Armitage. And at the beginning of the movie, she brings the kids over to him, and he asks the kids to go run an errand to the store, get something so that he can talk to the mother. They're already separated, but then he tells her that he is getting married to his girlfriend, who seems like she's probably about 20, 25 years younger than the Alicia Silverstone character. And Alicia Silverstone is already distraught, but this completely breaks her. And after she sort of storms out of his apartment, the next thing we do is we see her in her house, drinking wine very calmly, and then all of a sudden she kills herself. I mean, that shocked me right there, that happened. I mean, she was just so calm, matter of fact, drinking wine at the dining room table. Boom, the gun comes out, and that's it. So right there, I was just completely taken aback. First of all, I like Alicia Silverstone as an actress. So to see her eliminated from this movie 10 minutes in, I was really kind of disappointed. I thought she was going to be one of the main players in this. To have her taken out in such a tragic and depressing way, I mean, it really made it doubly tough. But right then and there, I knew, man, this is going to be a dark film. And I don't necessarily dislike dark films, but I kind of felt this is going to be so dark. I wonder if I can really handle this one. Then, Tracy, we talk about these two children. Jaeden and Mia. And at first, they seem like very sympathetic characters. And how could they not be? I mean, their mother has just killed
Mhm.
herself. So they are left with the father and the girlfriend that they don't like to begin with. Mia, especially, has taken the suicide death of her mother very hard. She is in bed in one scene. The father is trying to console her. She's brought up very religiously by the mother. She keeps saying that mom is not going to be able to go to heaven now because she has taken her own life, and she's really upset about that. So she's really consumed by this whole thing, and it's a horrific tragedy for any child to deal with. However, as the film progresses, it really becomes apparent that both Mia and Jaeden, these two kids are really, for lack of a better word, a couple of little devils. I mean, the way that they treat their father's girlfriend, Grace, they treat her abominably. At first, they refuse to talk to her. They essentially have placed the blame for their mother's death on Grace, even though that's really not fair. And at the same time, they're holding their father completely blameless. I mean, it was the father who made the decision to leave the mother, and the father is now with this younger girlfriend, and he's the one who tells the Alicia Silverstone character, the mother, that, oh, by the way, yeah, we're going to get married, me and Grace, here in a couple of months. And yet the kids really don't take their anger out on him. All of it is directed toward Grace. And then, again, without giving up too much of what's going on, their decision to play some nasty tricks, practical joke, if you will, on Grace. I mean, that's just plain cruel, especially given that Grace, as you mentioned, is the only surviving member of a cult in which everyone, including her father, committed suicide. So this young Grace, who's got to be what, in her late 20s, has already had a very
Mhm.
difficult life. And now she's got these two kids playing these mean practical jokes on her. It is just so cruel in my mind to see this. And as it turns out, also very foolish for what these children did and what's going to eventually happen in the movie. So those are some of my thoughts in terms of the tone of the movie. This is really sad and dark and
Mm.
difficult material, and I think I might need therapy after watching it. What do you
Oh
think, Tracy?
no. You are absolutely correct, 100%. And the first few minutes of this film, so like you mentioned, like the first 10, 15 minutes or so, it does set the stage for the pending storyline and the overall feel of this movie. The scene with the mother in her dining room taking her own life was very, very, very disturbing. I can't emphasize that enough. And I wasn't expecting that to happen. I actually stopped the movie at that point. I needed to stop the movie for myself and just kind of process what I had already watched so far and just to kind of like emotionally deal with that scene because
Yeah,
it literally comes out of nowhere. Like really, it's not what you would expect at all. Um, but then the movie goes and it picks up 6 months later. So 6 months after that tragic incident, these children are still very much upset. And all Grace wants to do is to get to know the children and to be a part of their family. We get, we get an insight into Grace's story just a little bit. We're aware that she struggles terribly with her own past trauma and her mental health. The environment that she's in that lodge, the isolation, the blizzard that's starting to happen, the treatment that she gets from those children, it all contributes to Grace's downward spiral throughout the film. You can see it as this film goes on. And there are so many things at play here in this movie. And it's really nothing like any watcher would expect to see from a film. You're just kind of left there with a gut punch at certain points. It's a really hard film to give my full thoughts on without releasing a whole bunch of spoilers. But the point of the story is all the twists that it takes from beginning to end. And the final scene in this movie, again, is really disturbing. It's not that you don't actually see anything in this movie at all. It's more of an interpretation and, what is perceived to happen next, especially in the end moments. And again, it is a really hard watch, but it keeps you on the edge of your seat. It really does, because for me, I need to find out, what the heck is going on? Is this reality? Is this just something that's going on in Grace's mind? Like, what is it? What's going on? So yeah, that's kind of like my thoughts on it.
Yeah, right. When you say we don't really see anything in terms of blood and gore. There are a couple of gunshots that result in terrible tragedies. We've already talked about the suicide of the Alicia Silverstone character, but it's not like we see necessarily, that much blood. Although with the later killing, we do see some, but it's not gory. I mean, it's not a film that's physically upsetting. It's all done very psychologically. It's got a very dark tone. I think you shared your notes with me, and I think at some point you said this kind of reminded you of The Shining, right? In terms of the atmosphere?
Yeah, absolutely. Just it gave off The Shining vibes, like, the isolation in the lodge, because, The Shining at the Overlook. I mean, granted, their lodge is not quite Overlook, but it's, out in no man's land in the middle of nowhere. There's no neighboring towns. They're 5 hours away, and you're watching somebody just spiral with their mental health, both in The Shining and in the lodge. So I kind of got that feeling like really early on, like once that snow started coming, I was like, instantly, this feels like The Shining.
And then to make the atmosphere even tougher, there's this huge frozen lake in front of the house. And Riley Keough's character, Grace, actually falls into the water early in the movie and has to be rescued by one of the kids. That's a nightmarish scenario. And that's something that reminds me of my youth when I was in 7th grade. I had some friends over for a weekend birthday party at my house. And on Saturday afternoon, we drove around. We found a local pond that was frozen over where we could ice skate. And I actually fell through the ice. I went underwater. And luckily, my friend, Matt Silverman, whom I still communicate with on Facebook, and he's a baseball author. He's come to the Hall of Fame. Luckily, he saw me fall into the water and he came over and rescued me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing the show right now.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. So
that is scary.
With me too. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Like that's like, I have certain fears, and, that is one of them, like drowning. And just adding like falling through like ice just adds that whole entire layer. That was a really scary scene. I can't believe that you went through that yourself. Like that, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it ended up being more embarrassing than anything else because I had to spend the rest of the afternoon in the car. My father had driven us. I was in 7th grade, so I wasn't driving at that point. And he turned the heat on full blast, and I had to sit in the car soaking wet. I didn't want to ruin everybody else's afternoon, so they all kept ice skating without incident. I waited for them in the car. Of course, my mother got the phone call and was in full panic. And as I recall, I can't remember if she came out to see me because my mother never drove, so
oh my goodness,
she might have had to just wait until I got home. But she was in full panic when she heard that I had fallen through the ice, and it was more embarrassing, thankfully, than anything that you could consider catastrophic. Other things I want to talk about with this movie. and I've talked about how it's very dark and it's very
Mhm.
somber. But a criticism I have, I would have liked to have seen more insight into Grace's character. How exactly was it that she survived this suicide cult? I don't think that's really ever explained. I'd like to have known how she was able to overcome this. I mean, she was probably about the same age as Aiden and Mia were when this happened to her. How did she overcome this? I was kind of waiting to learn more about that, but her character is so quiet and so restrained, and these kids will never talk to her. So there's not much of an opportunity to learn about her past and learn about the cult. I'm curious what you thought about that. Did you feel like you knew enough about Grace's past, or are you like
No.
me in thinking I would have liked to have known more?
I really would have liked to have known more. Just I there's so much information that was kind of missing, and I find cults kind of fascinating on like how they kind of gather people, and this one was pretty interesting, and I would have liked to have gotten more information on that, especially, the last sole survivor of a mass cult suicide. Like, I can't even imagine the trauma that this character would have faced, and that's a whole story on its own. Like, they could do, like, a prequel to this.
Mhm.
And how the heck did the father go from writing about the situation, because he was like a newspaper author and he wrote a book about this? How did he go from writing a book to wanting to marry this young girl who, like you said, was probably a good 20 years younger than he is? So I
At
just,
least.
oh my gosh, I would love to know just how that came to be. Like, there's a whole other side to this movie, I think, that they really could dive right into.
I would have been really curious to know, was it part of Grace's father's plan for her to survive that mass suicide? Or
Mm,
did she pull like what some of the people from the Guyana cult did, where they didn't drink the Kool-Aid and they were able to survive? Did she sort of defy that plan? Did she, at the last second, not go along? And I don't think it's ever explained how they all died, whether it was poison or some other method. So I'm just
mhm.
wondering, was she supposed to die? Was she not supposed to die? Did the father want her to be the only survivor? Or did she somehow finagle her way out of it and say, I don't want to be a part of this. I'm just 12, 13. I need to go on living. I was really curious about that. Do you have a gut feeling what happened there? Do you think she was supposed to die, or do you think that the father wanted to spare her from the mass suicide?
Oh, I kind of went back and forth with that. And I think my last thought on that was she really was supposed to die.
Mm,
Um, and I feel that way only because of certain things that happen in the latter parts of the movie about um, her desire to repent. Um,
mm.
I think it's the guilt factor that she didn't die back when she was a member of that cult. So I think that's kind of right now, that's what I would feel. So I think.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Mm,
Again, it's never spelled out. We don't know this for
no.
sure, but you kind of get the feeling that, that might have been the case. And I'll tell you what, for the most part, putting that aside, for the most part, I feel very sympathetic to Grace's character.
Mhm.
She's trying to reach out to these kids, trying to talk to them. There's the scene just before she falls into the ice. She's wearing the mother's ski cap, and she didn't realize it was the mother's. The kids immediately point that out to her, and she feels really bad that she has taken the late mother's ski cap. She immediately takes it off and gives it to one of the kids.
Mhm.
So in every turn, she is trying to be the good person. She's trying to be the bridge to reach out to these kids, to establish a good relationship and hopefully establish a new family going forward. And these kids, really, for the most part, they're not having any of it. They just will not compromise. They act like Grace is the one who pulled the trigger on the mother, and it's just a bit much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that scene in particular, she was so innocent, and then the little girl just takes the hat, snatches it, and away she goes and puts it on her own head. And you're right, Grace does try. She had like a movie night for the kids. She put the movie The Thing on and Jack Frost, and she tried so hard. And you're right, the kids just didn't. They were just adamant that, nope, I'm not going to speak to you. Don't bother cooking for me. I don't want anything from you. Nothing to do with you. And it, your heart kind of goes out to Grace because, given her past history, she just wanted love and acceptance, and she thought she could do it. And the kids at every point were like, no, I'm not having any of that.
Yeah. Her choice for movie night may not have been the best. The Thing from 1982, one of the most graphically violent films ever, maybe not appropriate for 12 to 14-year-olds to watch.
I think you might have a point there.
Yeah. And then the Jack Frost movie that they started watching later, when Grace realized that The Thing was not the right film, is that the Jack Frost with Michael Keaton, or is it the horror one? That's what I was trying to figure out.
Oh my gosh, I'm not sure.
Not sure.
I want to speculate it was probably the horror version, just given the movie The Thing.
Right. Well, even if it was the horror version, it's certainly not as graphic or as gory as The Thing, which is a great film, one of John Carpenter's best, but a movie that is certainly not appropriate for a younger audience. No. All right, let's get a few final thoughts, Tracy, on this film, The Lodge. The movie was very well photographed, beautifully shot, and it was very well acted. All four of the main participants, Grace, the father, the two children. It was a movie that kept you guessing at several times. You weren't sure what was real, what was not real, what was actually transpiring. So it was effective at doing those things. I, however, just found it to be so dark, so depressing, and ultimately such a sad movie with an ending that just felt hopeless to me. I mean, if they had continued that movie for another 30 seconds, it wasn't going to be good. I prefer personally horror films that have happier endings, or at the very least, an ending with a sliver of optimism, a sliver of hope. But The Lodge, for me, had none of that. So I have to give it a pretty low rating. I give it 2 stars. What are your final thoughts, your final ranking for The Lodge?
Well, this movie was an hour and 40 minutes, which was, it was more than adequate. The scenery was beautiful. It was really well done. I found it eerie, a la Shining, I guess. I thought the acting, like you mentioned, was really strong. The children, actually, Jaeden Martell and Lia McHugh, they have excellent credits already. They have Marvel comic credits, Stephen King It movie credits, tons of great credits. And Riley Keough, who played Grace, was amazing. I kept trying to figure out where I knew her from. I looked up her IMDb and I didn't recognize anything that she had been in. But then I found out she's Lisa Marie Presley's daughter, which just kind of like blew my mind. I mean, she looks so much like her mother when her mother was younger. I think maybe that's why I felt she was very familiar. But overall, I found it was even paced. Not really any gore. I didn't really find any jump scares. I don't know if you found that there were jump scares, but it was an intense psychological horror film. The undertone of the cult, I thought, was a nice touch to add to my own angst watching it. And, this film deals with a lot. There's intense emotional scenes, the character's vulnerability. It is really dark, like you mentioned, concerning various aspects. There is a creepy dollhouse that I want to mention too that was in this film.
Yeah.
In some of the scenes, the camera would flash to it and various dolls inside kind of reenacting different things that had happened during the movie. And I personally find doll houses super creepy in general. The idea of a dollhouse. I mean, it was used in the movie, the miniseries, The Haunting of Hill House, and Hereditary, for example. Like, you know, horror, dollhouse, creepy, they all kind of mesh together. But, you know, I did enjoy The Lodge. I found it was really quite different and not what I was expecting at all once you see the full story. I watched the trailer, and the trailer does not give any details away. It gives you no sense of what this movie truly is about, really, at all. So the trailer is not a spoiler, but it certainly doesn't give you the honest insight as to how dark this film is. But I'd give it a 3.5 stars, and I would go back and watch this again. I need to have time, of course. Like, I would not watch it back to back. I might watch it again in like 6 months from now, but I did like it. I'd like to go back to see if there's something that I can pick up that I didn't pick up the first time because I was so mind blown at certain things. Just to see if I can piece more of that story together. But I really was impressed. It was weird that I was so impressed by something that was so dark. But yeah, 3.5.
All right. Well, you give it 3.5 stars. Very good rating. I'm not in agreement with that, but that's okay. That makes for good broadcasting when you have different opinions. So I give it 2 stars. And just to throw in an unofficial third review, last night I was watching the film. My wife fell asleep on the couch behind me. Then she woke up about 10 minutes into the movie, said she was getting ready to head up. And as she so often does, she starts watching a movie that I'm watching on TV. She gets sucked into it. She ended up getting onto another couch and watching the movie till the end, and she did not like it at all. She said that was not good. I give it 0.5 star.
Oh my goodness. Wow. 0.5 star. I think that's a record, Bruce. You'll have to write that down.
Yeah. Granted, she did miss the first few minutes of the film, so that may have been a factor. And
that could have produced a 0-star rating.
Right. So unofficially 0.5 star from my wife, Sue. 3.5 from you, 2 stars from you. Certainly, 2 stars from me. Certainly, though, it is a film that gets you talking, gets you thinking. And I suspect you're right. That's a film that if you watch again, you'll notice some things that you didn't see the first time around, and maybe we'll answer some of the questions that we brought up during this review. So that's our thoughts on The Lodge. Earlier, we talked about Black Christmas. Very much a classic Christmas film from 1974. Tracy gave that 3 stars. I gave it 3.5. And my wife, Sue, did not check in on that one. She was asleep at that time. Well, Tracy, that'll do it for the show. Thanks for your contributions and really doing a pretty deep dive into The Lodge. Good research, good note-taking, and some great thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. This is always enjoyable. And if we weren't doing this type of an episode, I probably never would have watched Black Christmas or The Lodge. So I'm going to have to get my Christmas movie list really kicked into high gear for us for later on.
Yeah, it's good. We kind of force ourselves to watch and in some cases rewatch films so that we can provide, hopefully, some half-intelligent thoughts. That'll do it for this week's edition of the Ghostly Gallery podcast. My thanks to Tracy. Thanks to all of our listeners as well. You have certainly been an important part of the show. This was our 65th, by the way. I forgot to mention that. Milestone 65th episode for the Ghostly Gallery podcast, which started about a year and a half. Hard to believe that we've done that many shows, but it's been a lot of fun so far. We intend to keep it going. Thanks to everybody for supporting the program, listening in. We appreciate you joining us in this Museum of the Macabre, and we do hope to see you again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.